In today's episode of Today in World War II, February 2nd, the Soviets continue to put a ton of pressure on the Finns on the Karelian Isthmus in the Winter War. The Indian troops bag a nice amount of Italian prisoners in East Africa. General O'Connor, who's leading the Operation Compass attack against the Italians in Egypt and Libya, receives permission to outflank those retreating Italians. In a sad note, the FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, orders the most odious order in the history of U.S. history of the United States against American citizens. The northern pocket of Stalingrad surrenders. Stalin allows, which is a little bit of a surprise, he allows the United States Air Corps to operate from Soviet bases. And finally, an interesting little event that happened that had wide-reaching impact on the world of literature. Captain Solzhenitsyn is arrested by the Soviet secret police because he privately criticized Stalin. Let's get to work. Okay, so today, on February 2nd, 1940, the Soviet troops, as I mentioned yesterday, were continuing to assert and to pressure the Finns on the Mannerheim Line and on the Karelian Peninsula. And like I said yesterday, they shot 300,000 artillery shells against the Finns. They continue to do that. Now, remember, there was other fronts in the Winter War besides Karelia and north of Lake Ladoga. The Finns still kind of had the upper hand here because the Soviets had decided to bunch their resources and focus on the Mannerheim Line. So the Finns were still trying to encircle the Soviet 54th Division near Kuchmo. That's a provincial town in the middle of nowhere, really, except it became noteworthy because that's where an attack was taking place. More importantly, again, focusing back on the isthmus, the Karelian Isthmus. Viipuri was the provincial capital of Karelia, and that was a key city, a key target for the Soviets. Because once you get to Viipuri, then you're pretty much got an open road into Finland proper. That's the end of the isthmus, let's put it that way. So the Soviets tried to launch an offensive in that area in the bay. Remember, this is still winter, everything's still frozen, so you could attack over the Gulf of Finland, and your troops would not and your tanks would not fall into the ice. So they tried that, but luckily the Finns were able to bunch their aircraft and able to wipe that out. But still, we're at February 2nd now. Spoiler alert, this thing ends, the first week of March. So the tide is turning. You're going to see less and less good news, less news of victories, and more news of just body blows being handed to the Finns by the Soviets. Um, and let me tell you something. I'm going to make full disclosure here. It will be a body blow for me if you don't subscribe to my channel and click the little bell that will notify you whenever I drop a new video. Why is that important? Because I have low self-esteem and I need to have the validation. Well, not really. Okay, that's just me exaggerating. All right. I would like for you to do that. I'd like to have as many subscribers as I can. I create the content to bring them in. So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it. On February 2nd, 1941, we're going to shift our focus now to East Africa. Now, the Italian 5th Division, excuse me, the Indian 5th Division captured the Italian fortifications that had been defended by 8,000 troops and 32 artillery pieces in Eritrea, Italian East Africa. Um, that's a big bag. Another 8,000 Italians. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this video. I don't know if you know what happened to the Axis prisoners, but what the British did was they tended to send them to Canada, and they were used. And then, of course, the United States did the same thing later when the U.S. came into the war. But a lot of these prisoners of war were sent, to Canada on the Brit side and to the U.S. on our side, and they were used for labor. A lot of them were used for agricultural purposes Right now in the U.S., we have a lot of Central American and Mexican to come in and pick our crops and work. They keep the agricultural sector going in our country. In World War II, a lot of the men were out fighting. Women couldn't do the kind of hard breaking, back-breaking work that the men could do. So the POWs actually did a heck of a job, keeping our agricultural going when in a time of very low manpower availability because of the war. And I'm not just popped in my head. It has nothing to do with this battle per se. Just the idea that they took another 8,000 prisoners. I thought to myself, wow, that's an awful lot of beet pickers, in the plains of Canada. Uh, and then the noose was tightening in East Africa for the Italians on this day as well. The British aircraft carrier Formidable launched aircraft to mine the harbor of Mogadishu, which was the main port in Italian Somaliland. Mogadishu, as you probably know, was also a very famous battle that took place in the 90s. With our special forces and Rangers. That's a whole different topic, but just so you get an idea of where these events took place. You should always have an idea of what to do when it comes to liking my video and leaving a comment. That should just be, YouTube viewing 101. If you like a video, and if you enjoy it, you watch it, like it, and leave a quick comment because that's the reward that we content creators get from the YouTube algorithm. It's going to push our content to more people's feeds, and that's how our channel grows. So do me a solid, please. Okay, on February 2nd, 1941, the general who was in charge of Operation Compass, the actual implementation of it, he didn't come up with it himself, but he was on the firing line, and he part a division, a very important division under his command on this Operation Compass offensive was the 7th Armored Division, and he received um, permission. I believe it's from Wavell, General Wavell, who was the head overall command of the African campaign, North African campaign at this juncture. Um, the Italians were in full retreat. Remember, they had made a pathetic attempt to invade Egypt from Libya. They thought they could just walk into the Suez Canal and take over. Didn't realize the Brits had a lot more fighting spirit than they did, and so now the British were attacking. The Italians were no match for them, and they were in full retreat. And so O'Connor had requested permission to send his tanks ahead to flank them. On today's date, he received it. So we'll see how Operation Compass plays out as we move forward in this video series. On February 2nd, 1942, you know, let's put it this way. On December 7, 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, FDR made his very famous speech that said, "This is a day which will live in infamy." In my opinion, February 2nd, 1942 should be just as publicized as a day of infamy, only this would be a self-inflicted wound. Why? Because President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, and this authorized the military to remove Japanese American citizens from the West Coast to internment camps. Okay, they were also referred to as relocation centers. These were United States citizens. They had their constitutional rights, and you know this order completely shredded our constitution and threw it down the toilet. And just because of xenophobia and paranoia, there was no basis at all to claim that the Japanese Americans were not loyal and that they were going to cause harm to the war effort. Nothing like this happened against the German Americans, did it? Or the Italian Americans? You didn't see, Little Italy in different cities in the East Coast be emptied out and then put into relocation centers in the Appalachian Mountains. No, you didn't see that, but you did against the Japanese. I wonder why. What was the difference between those three groups? Germans, Italians, and Japanese. Probably their eyes, right? They were different than us, which is an odious, horrible act. And Roosevelt made some blunders in the war, and this was the biggest one. On February 2nd, 1943, the northern pocket of Stalingrad surrendered. Remember, yesterday, von Paulus, Field Marshal von Paulus, who was in the southern pocket with his 14 generals, glad he had an entourage. Anyway, he had surrendered, and so one day later, the northern pocket surrendered, and the German high command received word because they sent a German reconnaissance airplane over the city, and it confirmed their worst fears had come true, that Stalingrad was now done. The uh, Sixth Army was now done, and they were taken in captivity, and they had lost, was it close to 300,000 men? I think 105 went into captivity. Only 5,000 survived and were able to go back to Germany after the war. So, wow. All I can say is wow. What a blunder, right? And then on February 2nd, 1944, the United States Air Force had been negotiating for a while to allow to get permission from the Soviets to use their air bases in the Soviet Union. The idea was that the planes would take off from Great Britain and also the 15th Air Force in Italy, and they would fly missions deep into Germany. And instead of having to fight their way back through German fighters, they could continue on to Soviet air bases. They could land there, get rearmed and refueled, and they could, bomb their way back into Europe, into Italy or uh, England. And these were actually pretty effective. I was quite surprised that Stalin allowed this to happen. I know that if you look at the other side of the world, in the Pacific campaign, the United States Army Air Corps had been pleading with the Soviets to allow them to do the same thing in Japan, but Stalin at this time did not want to go into open conflict with the Japanese. He wanted to wait until we had done all the dirty work so he could come in and just take occupy northern China and North Korea. So right now he was perfectly willing to let us bleed in the Pacific, and he wasn't going to lift a finger on the Pacific side until he was good and well ready. Speaking of Soviet Union, on this date, February 2nd, 1944, there was an unknown captain who was in the Soviet Army, and he was arrested today. He was arrested because he had privately, again, the word privately is used here, as a, privately criticized Stalin. Somehow the secret police, the KGB, actually it was called the NKVD at the time, um, they had found out about that, and so uh, he was arrested, and that happened hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times during the Stalin regime. And who was this lonely captain, unknown captain? That why would I spend any time on this? Is because his name was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and give him about 20 years or less than 20 years, and he becomes a very, very important figure in world literature and Russian literature. I've read his books. The Gulag Archipelago is one of his famous works, but I've read most of his other books, and he became a symbol of Russian dissidents in the Soviet Union later. Eventually, he was allowed to leave the Soviet Union, and he stayed in America for a long time. Hated every second of it. Didn't like America either. He was just one of those people who didn't like much at all. Anyway, um, that's today. That's what happened today on February 2nd in World War II. Appreciate you being here, and I can't wait to get you another video tomorrow.